next bill that we are dealing with, this bill is relative to adopting the Interstate Compact on Educational Support for Military Children, and I will recognize Representative Robert Tiverge, who will be prime sponsor of the bill.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. It's my honor to be in front of this committee for the first time, and hopefully I do a good job. That being said, yes, this bill is an act relative to adopting Interstate Compact on Education Support for Military Children. Madam Chairman and committee members, for the record, my name is Robert Tiverge, legislature from representing Coast District 3, Berlin. Given the time constraints which all committee currently face, I will be brief. There are individuals present who will follow me and are better versed in responding to questions. In addition, I have included a sample committee report for your consideration. I do that when I'm a prime sponsor of a bill. That way it saves time for the committee to do a committee report. Of course, I only do the ought to pass motion. You're knowing very well that IPL is not in question here, please. Okay. The Interstate Compact on Education Opportunity for Military Children became effective in August 2008, when the first 10 states formally adopted the agreements. Since then, the number of states that have joined the compact have grown, with only, as of 2014, 4 states, New Hampshire being one who has yet to join the compact. Some of the relevant questions you may have as a committee, may be as followed. I've listed the questions and the responses. I won't address that now because given the time constraint, I think you can read those on your own. In closing, committee members, I can continue. However, I must allow others to testify. Please note that the legislation before you creates a new RSA Chapter 110D, which addresses in detail the requirements for interstate compact. I thank you for your time and consideration. I am pleased to answer any questions you may have, respectfully submitted. And you will have also a copy of the suggested committee report.
Thank you for your testimony, and we will ask Representative Grenier has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question.
Yes.
I just need clarification on what are the issues and military families encounter, school challenges. Could you give some examples of what those challenges are?
What I've done, Representative Grenier, is I have people testifying who will be giving you the details that you wish, and I don't want to take up more of your time. There are experts here to address that issue. If you don't
I
mind.
can wait, yes, I
Okay,
can.
thank you.
Representative Eaton?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Thanks for taking my question. Haven't we seen this bill before?
Yes, you have.
And why was it not passed then? Because this is something seems like it passed easily.
Well, I would assume so, but I didn't look at the history of this bill, but I'm sure that the Brigadier General can address that issue, because what took place in the past was, I believe, was a misunderstanding of the bill per se. Because in my opinion, its merits, to pass. But
Well, we would think
yes,
you would want to something that you would want to pass.
that's right. Hopefully so, Representative. Okay.
Any other questions? Representative Ladd?
Yes, Representative.
Thank you very much for taking my question, and I sat and chaired the subcommittee on this previously.
Okay.
And has it been rectified in this piece of legislation that we're receiving that laws that we have within this state won't be superseded by bylaws and rules of the Interstate Commission?
That is my understanding. However, I'm not sure about that. I would believe that would be the process in place.
Let me clarify that. You believe then that a bylaw and a rule made by that commission shall supersede statutory law in the state?
Well, I don't know how to answer that one, Representative.
May I just read part? On page 16, line 27, all member states' laws conflicting with this compact are superseded to the extent the conflict goes on down line 30, all lawful actions of the Interstate Commission, including all rules and bylaws promulgated by the Interstate Commission, are binding. This is where we were hung up previously,
Okay.
and so I don't see this language changing.
All right. Well, I have other people who can address that one, that issue, you know, for you, who were here previously as well, so.
No other questions? Thank you for your testimony. And I will call the State General Carolyn Wilson.
Good morning.
Morning, John.
For the record, Madam Chair and Committee, I'm Brigadier General Carolyn Carlson, I'm the Deputy Adjutant General for the State of New Hampshire. And so I say good morning to you all, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today on the impact this bill will have on New Hampshire military families. You will hear some expert testimony to address some of the issues that I've already heard with respect to this compact. We have with us the Executive Director of the Interstate Commission on Educational Opportunity for Military Children, the Commissioner of the State of Vermont and the Interstate Commission on Education Opportunity for Military Children, and the State Liaison Officer from the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. In addition, we have some packets that we'll provide for you that will have testimony from the Northeast Regional Liaison for the Department of Defense, State Liaison Office for Military Community and Family Policy. I'm just going to speak quickly regarding military demographics and the known future military impact on New Hampshire from the New Hampshire National Guard perspective. Others will speak again to the numbers that you will hear, but we in New Hampshire have, based on 2012 data, over 3,000 active military youth who may be eligible for consideration on the Military Interstate Children's Compact. This number will fluctuate, and it's based on active duty assignment rotations, retiree relocations, and National Guard and Reserve activations. From a National Guard perspective, this bill is significant. Our Adjutant General, Major General Riddell, as the largest force provider for military capability in the state of New Hampshire, subscribes to the concept of Fort New Hampshire, and that premise is that the New Hampshire National Guard will assist all New Hampshire members of the military and their families in all matters possible, regardless of component or status or era served, as long as we have the resources to do so. And this includes support for this bill, which if passed, will put in place a compact that will allow the uniform treatment of military children as they transfer between school districts and compact member states. Additionally, as our New Hampshire National Guard continues to transform for future mission requirements, we could well begin to see integration of active duty members and National Guard members within either state National Guard or state-assigned reserve units, away from traditionally large main operating bases. We have begun this transformation already within the New Hampshire Air National Guard at Pease Air National Guard Base. Currently, we have 100 active duty families assigned to Pease as part of the Total Force Integration Initiative, and with the selection of Pease as the first KC-46A unit in the Air National Guard and in the country to receive this new plane, we are anticipating 200 active duty members being assigned to Pease. Since all New England states except New Hampshire are compact states, a move to any of these states for an active duty member with a family could be enticing. Military members enjoy New Hampshire. It is evident with the veterans population making up 10% of the New Hampshire population. And it is important to note that this compact would apply not only to active component military members, but additionally to National Guard and Reserve members called to active duty pursuant to 10 U.S.C. sections 1209 and 1211, and would apply to retirees within 1 year of retirement who may choose to settle in New Hampshire. I encourage you to listen to the testimony, and I would be happy to answer any questions regarding this bill.
Madam Chair, thank you for being here. One question really, the committee is very involved with privacy these days, and on page 9, line 7, paragraph 9, also talks about collecting data on these children, and I'm just wondering is there anything in there that would subject the compact to applicable federal and state laws regarding privacy and protection of data?
We're very keen on that in the military as well.
Right.
Seeing no other questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And I would call Mark Pottinger.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, I'm Mark Ottinger. I live in Burlington, Vermont. I'm really here in three capacities. The first capacity is that I am the Military Compact Commissioner for the state of Vermont, and have been ever since 2011 when Vermont became the 39th state to adopt the compact. At that time, I was serving as general counsel of the state education agency. And so it was my responsibility to obviously be aware of the extent to which this compact could infringe upon local rights, state rights. It was also my privilege to work on behalf of military kids when issues came up with respect to the enforcement or implementation of the compact. So I can report to you, before getting into the details of my remarks, that in the 3 years that I have served as Military Compact Commissioner in the state of Vermont, I think it's safe to say that we in Vermont feel that it is tremendously beneficial, that there is no downside, and that without it, many delicate situations to which children of military families have been subjected as a result either of their parents moving from state to state or their parents being deployed and returning, many of the problems associated with that have been able to be smoothed over to the benefit of those kids. So as a general principle, we speak strongly in favor of the bill, which I guess is also reflective of the fact that it's been adopted in 46 states. It is important to consider the fact, and I speak now as a lawyer, that compacts are intended to essentially create a commonality of practice among states on matters that are intrinsically national in nature without having the need of having federal legislation. Federal legislation in this area would be more restricted than essentially a contract between and among states to act in manners that are consistent. So I think that speaks to the success of the compact, as I said, I can report to you that from Vermont's perspective, it's worked extremely well. I'll give you an example of how the compact would protect the interests of New Hampshire children of military families when they go elsewhere. One of the aspects that's addressed in the compact is kindergarten starting ages. We see situations at times, for example, when a child comes from another state, having started kindergarten there, where the threshold age was younger than, let's say, the receiving state. And so the local schools are confronted with the question, can we allow this person to be in kindergarten, or are they too young? So I think that anybody in education, anyone who is a parent, would recognize that the idea of forcing a child to restart kindergarten makes no sense for that child. Yet, if that child is able to start or to continue at an earlier age, is that fair to the other kids? One of the experiences that I had, I've had this experience both ways. Vermont students going somewhere else and being able to continue in kindergarten notwithstanding an earlier start age. That was an example to me of a Vermont child being able to, and a Vermont family being able to protect the rights that that Vermont child had under Vermont law when they went elsewhere. So if anything, it was an expansion of the rights or the protection of the rights of those Vermont kids. What about if, let's say, a California child comes to Vermont under a similar circumstance? Well, under those circumstances, my experience is that the school administrators would typically call me as general counsel for the Agency of Education. And when they found out that they had the ability to be flexible because of the provisions of the compact, they were relieved. And they had no desire to try and prohibit a young child who had already started kindergarten from not continuing. What they wanted to hear is that under Vermont law, which is what the compact is in Vermont, they had the ability to do what was right for that child. So the compact both, to some extent, extends state rights for kids that go elsewhere, and to some extent it gives our education administrators the ability to be flexible in the interest of the best interest of the kids. And really, that's what it's all about. I wanted to point out, as is in my written remarks, that New Hampshire is part of 41 compacts. And there are around 200 compacts that are in existence around the country, which are basically collaboration of states in similar areas. 5 of your compacts here in New Hampshire are education related. One of them that relates to Vermont is the New Hampshire-Vermont Interstate School District Compact. You probably know that we have 2 interstate school districts. One is the Dresden School District. I'm actually a graduate of Hanover High School. It's a school district that goes both in Hanover and Norwich. Also further north, there is the Rivendell School District. So this is yet another example of a compact relating to education, which is extremely successful in serving the needs of Vermont and New Hampshire in a way that local law could not, and in a way that federal law simply isn't contemplated to do. I wanted to point out that Vermont has a relatively high percentage of Garden Reserve, and I know that I've heard the number 636 full-time kids attached to full-time military in New Hampshire, and then another 2,000 or so military and Guard Reserve kids. Speaking briefly about the impact of the compact on Guard and Reserve. The compact does apply to Guard and Reserve when those individuals are on what are called Title 10 orders. So for example, when we had recent deployments to Iraq and to Afghanistan, the benefits of the compact apply to Guard and Reserve just as they would to full-time, and for a year after getting back, and for a year after retirement. But I'll also tell you that what we have done in Vermont is to develop a culture of sort of treating the interstate compact and the principles that it stands for sort of in an intra-state way. So for example, when somebody from Camp Johnson up in the Burlington area ends up getting deployed and wants to send his or her child, let's say the person's a single parent, down to the center part of the state, down to Woodstock to attend high school. In the Vermont Agency of Education's position is that the provisions of the compact which would protect that child if he or she moved out of state should and do protect the child just as much if they move internally to the state, to prevent them from being disadvantaged by differential graduation requirements, entrance issues, timeliness of sports and eligibility for extracurriculars. And so I will tell you that in a state that is primarily Guard and Reserve, like Vermont, the compact has just as much value, if not more, than we'll leave it at that. I also want to tell you about something called MSEC, the Military Child Education Consortium. Because when we got involved in Vermont in the compact, we were introduced to this organization, which, and what it has done for us, it's, we've had, I think, about half a dozen two-day events where the military folks come in and they teach our guidance counselors. We have about 600 guidance counselors in the state of Vermont. They have a training, two-day training for guidance counselors whose students or whose local population is about to be subjected to a deployment. Before the deployment, during the deployment, and upon return of that deployment. There's 3 sort of different sets of issues that come up. So the military has come into Vermont, has done these trainings totally for free. We at this point have at least half of our guidance counselors through the process. They, when they go to these events, are instructed to please go back and essentially spread the word. And what we hear back from the field is that without the knowledge that these guidance counselors have been given through the military collaboration that is part of the compact and MSEC, without that knowledge they would have been far less successful in supporting the very high per capita deployments that we would have. So in closing, I would say that what the compact has been for Vermont has been an augmentation of communication between the military, the local school districts, the state education agency. It really has allowed our students to protect rights when they move out of state, and it's really allowed our administrators to be more flexible for students that come into the state, which is intrinsically what they want to do anyway. Final shout out to the staff at MIC3. They're wonderful. They're there 24/7. They forward to their personal phones, and anytime that I have a question before I call another state compact commissioner, if it gets to that, I refer my questions to the office down in Lexington. We look at their website. The website is very, very helpful in and of itself. I can't say enough about the organization. I would be happy to answer questions either before the testimony of General Hogan or others, or at this time, as the committee wishes.
What was that organization again? Military Child Education
It's the-
Coalition?
it's-
Coalition.
Yeah, MCEC.
Coalition, not consortium.
Right, I think that's right, coalition, right. MCEC.
Thank you.
And it'll come up on the internet just as soon as you put that in. Great organization.
Did you submit written testimony? Because you mentioned that, but I didn't see
I
it.
did, it should be in the packet.
And that's packet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Myler and then Representative Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I may be on another planet, this is a whole new thing. I mean, I'm somewhat familiar with the DOD schools and what happens with children there. I have no clue what you're talking about. I'm sorry, maybe I'm the only one on the committee. When you talk about military children, can you explain to me what some of the issues are, why you need this compact?
So let me give you a couple of examples. Graduation requirements. The typical fact pattern might be that a military member is transferred from Texas to Vermont. They have one child, let's say, who is an incoming senior. Let's say that Texas has a 1-year foreign language requirement, and the Vermont high school where the senior is about to land has a 2-year requirement. One of the questions would be, is that high school senior going to be delayed a year because he or she is going to have to take a 2nd year of foreign language? Under the compact, a coordination system is set up whereby the local high school in Vermont has the ability to waive that 2nd year of foreign language, or if it chooses not to do that and it's completely within its discretion, then the compact contemplates that the high school graduation will be done from the Texas high school, but either way that the child's graduation will not be delayed. Another example, kindergarten entry ages. And as I mentioned, there are some states that have earlier entry ages. You might have a child traveling with a military family who arrives in the new state and they say, you're too young to be in the kindergarten class. Response being, but I've already started in the other school. Again, the compact gives the local school, the receiving school, the ability to allow the student to remain in kindergarten. Yet the local school district also has the right to test that child to make sure that that placement is appropriate. But this is an issue that I've seen in Vermont several times, and again, the reaction of the local administrators always is, you mean we can do this? And the answer is yes. And so I say you can do it if you feel it's in the child's best interest. And that typically has been the outcome. Placement in classes. You know, somebody finishes in Texas Algebra 1 and moves to Vermont. Presumptively, they get put in Algebra 2 for the next year. The school still has the ability to test a child. If it turns out that the Algebra 1 from the sending district wasn't really up to par, then the child can get reassigned into Algebra 1, whatever is appropriate for the child. So again, it gives the receiving school flexibility, and it gives the sending, the child from the sending district the right to protect their rights. There are about 3 or 4 other categories of potential education disadvantage that students of military families can be subjected to. They're equally addressed in this compact. It's an attempt to level the playing field for these kids because they move on average 3, 4, 5, 6 times during a K through 12 career.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Senator Brennan and then
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for taking your question. And also thank you for the examples, which I wanted from before. But there is an underlying concern I have, and I'll do it as an example for clarification. Suppose a student moves to a location, enters a public school in that area, and has had 3 years of, let's just say, lack. And the student wants a 4th year. But lo and behold, that school district does not offer a 4th year. So would that school district be required to get a teacher in at conceivably cost to the district and give that student a 4th year?
The answer is no. There's nothing in the compact that mandates curriculum. So the short answer is absolutely not. Now, let me just make one slight distinction, because the compact speaks about special education. And that's an interesting area, because as you all know from your work here in this committee, the IDEA is federal legislation, and so if a child comes in from another state, you have to essentially continue comparable services, reassess the child, call the IEP team. So my view is that you can kind of assume that the compact's discussions about special ed are subsumed under that federal piece of legislation. But in terms of, there is no forced curriculum here. There's nothing that a receiving school will have to do to essentially build resources, hire teachers. They simply have to allow this incoming student to fit in as comparable and as smooth a way as it's possible. So it's not going to place any non-pre-existing burden on the local schools.
Yeah, and anything to do with special ed services is covered already, and that would have to be delivered whether or not we had the compact.
Correct, the incoming students, and that's true whether the student moves from the north of New Hampshire to the south, and, you know, is in a new placement, you continue the services as best you can, you marshal the IEP team, you can change the services, but you have to provide the cost to the parents. But yes, the special ed piece is really trumped in Vermont and New Hampshire and everywhere else in the 50 states by the IDE.
Senator Black?
Yeah, I can only associate with my school district. I've been on the school board for quite a while in Milford. And I'm gonna have to join and represent Milo's team. I don't know what you're doing, because everything here I can answer you as far as my school district. We admit people before the age limit in kindergarten. We require more credit than any other school in the state of New Hampshire. We have people coming in from schools, other schools, not military, who have not had 5 years. We require 4 years of math. We have children coming in that don't have 4 years of math. But there's waivers for all of these things. So I don't know what this bill actually does, is what I'm trying to figure out, which we don't do already. We let people come in grades. When people move in that are not military, they move in from all over the state, all over the country. They're tested. Are you ready for the 7th grade? Are you ready for the 6th grade? Do you have the requirements that you covered all the 6th grade? I don't know what this does, except it makes a separation between citizens and servicemen.
Sir, I think a great deal of this is going to be covered in my testimony when we talk about this. But one of the things that is the benefit of the compact is the connection to the entire stratosphere. And I understand and appreciate your school system is taking care of these soldiers or these children as if they were their own. But if a military child is transferred out of that school system into another school system, this compact ensures that your investment will not be lost as he moves into another school system. And really, when we talk about the specifics, and I'll look forward to doing that here in a moment, I think a majority of your questions will be answered. But as a body, as a complete body, we make sure that we have visibility of these military children who happen to be highly mobile just because of their relationship with the military.
And if I could just follow up briefly on that, it sounds like your school district is very nuanced and very enlightened in terms of its approach to waivers and so on. But I would have to say that if a military connected child were to find him or herself in a district that wasn't so enlightened, the military compact does help to facilitate the communication and the collaboration that essentially can make sure that the kind of result that you're saying you automatically provide to kids, that would happen anywhere that the compact is in existence.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking my question. Aside from my questions, which are dealing with the appeal process, which we have to go the route of going through the United States District Court, Columbia, in Washington, D.C., and some of the rules and policies which override statute, did Vermont look at some of the terminology within this boilerplate compact, which this is what this is, and look at terms like extracurricular. We don't use the words extracurricular in this state. We use co-curricular, intramural. Those are some of the areas which there's a lot of differing terminology here. Did Vermont, in fact, change the compact to reflect statutory language that is used in that state, like others have done? Or have you just put the boilerplate in?
We debated a couple of definitional issues, and I will tell you that it is possible for a state to adopt a version of the compact that is somewhat at variance with the boilerplate, as long as it's not what we call the law material. In other words, if you said, well, we don't want to have chapter 7, so we want to excise that. This is a compact. It's intended to be uniform across the nation, and that's the whole purpose behind it. So in terms of the definition of co-curricular versus extracurricular, that type of thing would be within the purview, I think, of the state of New Hampshire to basically say, we're willing to adopt this compact, but we want to have the following terms clarified, or what would happen under those circumstances is that Rick Masters, who's the general counsel for MIC3, his responsibility is to look over that document, would offer an opinion to MIC3 as to whether the proposed deviation from the boilerplate was material or not material. If it was not material, and if New Hampshire were to pass the compact with that change, that would be perfectly fine. But in Vermont, I mean, we were concerned about the cost, and I can tell you about that if time permits. But so the only material or potentially material thing that we put in was a provision. One of our senators wanted to cap the cost because at that time we only had 43 in 2011. We had 43 full-time military kids. There was no $2,000 minimum dues threshold at that time. So testimony was it's only going to cost you $43. One of our senators said, but what if you change the rules in that respect? And you mentioned there's the rules question. I'd like to address that briefly. So what we did was we put a $100 cap. But then what happened was the rules got changed the next year or the year after that at the MIC level to put in a minimum threshold. Typically it's $1 per resident child, full-time resident child. So we have a lot of Guard and Reserve, but we only had a handful, 50 permanent kids. So it was a $50, that got increased pursuant to the rules. It was proposed to be increased to a minimum of $2,000. So at this point, no state pays more than $60,000, no state pays less than $2,000. You, I understand, have 636 full-time military kids, so that would be the current amount. You would therefore pay the $2,000 threshold. But if I can just digress for a moment into the scope of rulemaking that I think you asked about earlier. Just like your local agencies here in New Hampshire cannot write rules that are either beyond the scope of your legislation or contrary to it, the rulemaking authority that MIC3 has is essentially subservient to the language of the compact itself. So you don't have to be concerned that if you pass the compact, that somehow MIC3 is then going to have the ability to pass rules that would somehow change the meaning of the compact, because rules are always subservient to statutes.
I do have several questions, but I think we could take too much time doing that. So, thank you very much.
Probably go. Seeing no other questions, I would recognize Stephen Hogan.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. I'm Steve Hogan. I'm from Lexington, Kentucky. Personally, I'd like to applaud you on the hospitality that I've received when I've come into the great state of New Hampshire. The very first thing that greeted me at Manchester Airport was how New Hampshire supported its troops. And I've heard about Fort New Hampshire and other things of that nature. And I'm very happy about that. My frame of reference is that I've been a professional soldier for 30 years. And during that time that I've been a soldier, I've been a military parent for 23 years. So I've got some insight about some of these difficulties. And in your packet, there is a PowerPoint presentation that I think that we can go through and talk about some of the specifics of the compact if you would take a moment to draw that out. And I did provide a written testimony as well.
Thank you.
My function as the Executive Director of the Military Interstate Children's Compact Commission means that we are the Secretariat for the National Commission, which is a field of 46 plus 1 currently is the rulemaking body for the commission. The Executive Office in Lexington, Kentucky serves as the Secretariat and the staff for all commission business. So if and when New Hampshire does adopt the compact, I and my people will be your staff. The second slide here that talks about key issues affecting military students. These are the academic issues that we have to deal with in view of a highly mobile child transferred from post to post. One of the things to note is a typical student experiences between 6 to 9 transitions between postings, interstate changes during their school career, and at least 2 of these transitions during their high school years. That causes a great deal of difficulty in trying to get a consistent strategy towards their educational career and making sure that they're being given all of the benefits that students that do not entail such high mobility will enjoy. Slide below that also talks about issues affecting military students. But these are interpersonal issues that affect these performance. Unfortunately, academic issues is not the only thing that these children face. The stressors of absenteeism, high mobility, deployments, and adjusting to new circumstances take a toll on these children as well. It's something that I've reflected on often, that the children in this equation is the only entity that did not volunteer for their circumstances, but yet have to bear the strains and the sacrifices of a military lifestyle. And this commission seeks to be a comprehensive collection and coalition of states to address these transition issues. Slide number 4 is background and status. A little background on MIC3. We were developed by the Department of Defense with assistance from the Council of State Government, which is the company that I'm attached to in Lexington, Kentucky. We have a 360-degree view of the issue, along with national associations, state officials, state legislatures, state commissions, anybody that has input or value-added information on this as an issue are welcome at our table and included. And currently we are adopted by 46 states and the District of Columbia, which gives these protections to approximately 98% of military school-aged children. The next slide is the member states, which depicts those states at this point that are not members of the compact. When we talk about major points, the first thing that we're going to talk about is key educational transition issues encountered by military families, and there are 5 main ones of those: enrollment, placement, attendance, eligibility, and graduation. And we will talk about each one of those in a little bit more depth as this progresses. Who is eligible for these protections are children of active duty service members in Title 10 United States Code, National Guard and Reserve on active duty orders, as well as Title 10 military veterans who are medically discharged or retired from service within a 1-year period. Second slide that addresses major points is that we are designed to provide inputs and resolve recognized transition issues, and are not to impact local curriculum or standards of education. But we look at this compact as being a bridging agent from the sending state to the receiving state, and that language is often referred to in the compact language, where we give a level bridge where we walk with the families together, the sending state and the receiving state, and address these transitions.
Can I just interrupt you there?
Yes, ma'am.
Your intention to go through this entire slideshow?
No, ma'am. I've only got 2 left, but that's...
We're 15 minutes behind in our next bill, and I'm sure this is going to a subcommittee
All right.
where we can look at this in more in-depth.
Yes, ma'am. Well, in view of the time, I would direct you to the next slide, which talks about compact content. And those specific areas that we address, enrollment, placement, and attendance, eligibility, graduation, and state coordination. And invite your questions about that in the interest of time, if there's anything any more specific. Because I think the written testimonies go into great detail about explaining the functions of each one of the departments.
There's excellent information in this packet, and I think we just need time to digest it. I'm going to, if there's no immediate questions for clarification of any point, I'm going to recess this hearing as well. And the chairman will let us know when she's going to. I'm assuming this will also be put on next Tuesday.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
Call of the chair.
Call of the chair.
Mr. Luisi?
At the call of the chair, yes.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
One other individual who is here today who came to testify in case the committee would have a minute or two is Mary Ann Weiner, who is the school liaison officer from the Portsmouth area, who would love to talk to you.
Okay, I would recognize Mary Ann Minor for
Thank you.
a 30-second commercial.
A 30-second commercial. Honorable Chair, New Hampshire Legislature, I'm Dr. Mary Ann Minor, School Liaison Officer at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. 41-year veteran educator, and if you read my resume, it would look as if I was the teacher who couldn't keep a job because my husband was career Air Force and we moved and moved and moved. Having spent 41 years in both the classroom and in central office administration, I now have the perfect job at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard as the school liaison officer. I'm at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. I am responsible for children within a 50-mile radius of the shipyard. And obviously that extends to our New Hampshire area. And I work frequently with New Hampshire schools. And I heard the need this morning for stories, for examples, real life examples. And that's why I asked you to defer to me for just a few minutes. You heard a lot about those 3,000 plus children, and you heard it in general terms. I'm here to put some faces to those children and to talk about some specific cases. And I do have written testimony, but I want to share just a couple of those examples with you. I worked recently in a rural community in New Hampshire, one quite unfamiliar with the military. With an Air Force father assigned to a remote location, a mother and her 2 children had returned to this area while the father was deployed. One of the children had special needs. In this very small area involving special needs, the community was doing everything to support that child's special needs. But what it looks like in a small little community where most kids stay in the K-12 system, and for this child, who was going to be leaving in April to a new assignment, it was very, very important that testing be done expeditiously and that it also be documented very, very detailed, in great detail, so that that child could go to a new duty station where the Air Force could be certain that that child's needs could be met. There are some bases where that's not possible, and so assignments are determined by that. I became involved with the family because they were very fragile, as you can imagine. Fragile about the special needs, fragile about dad's deployment, fragile about not knowing where they were going. And we eventually got through it. And the child's needs were documented and the testing completed. So when you speak about the community of Milford and the wonderful things that you are doing there, I have no doubt, and in my experience, I have found individual schools to be very, very supportive. But what I've also found is there is a lack of consistency, and that this compact would bring consistency throughout the state. So our children have that level playing field, not only throughout the nation, but also within the state of New Hampshire. You're absolutely right. In the world of military-connected families, our children are the draftees. They have no choices. They can sit at a family meeting, but that doesn't mean that they have a choice in where they're going. This summer I was introduced to sisters, 2 sisters, daughters of a military doctor. They'd been in 15 different schools in their careers. They were wonderful, they were successful, they were both going to be teachers. 15 different schools. One of our students who enrolled this year in late August, by our rules in Maine at Trape Academy, would not have been able to try out for the football team. He was a kid who had been a star in a very large high school. Under the conditions of the compact, he would not get a chance to be placed on the team. He'd have to prove that he could do that, but he'd be given a chance to try out. Those are the kinds of things that don't give those children extra benefits. They just help level the playing field a little. If you can imagine, my commander's son, he's taken Virginia history, Washington state history, and Hawaii state history. And as a result, when the next state came along, he said, I really would like to take a fine arts guitar class, but he couldn't do it because he had to take their requirement. That would help level the playing field in that way. I want to give you another example.
You need to wrap up.
Okay, fine.
Go through all the
Thank you.
documents.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
The last one is a rising senior. This student was in place, parents got orders, off she's going to have to go to the other coast. With this compact, this child was able to stay in place, residing with family friends, without her parents relinquishing legal guardianship. That's so important. What parent wants to give up the rights to their child? Yet she was able to be successful and happy in her school. So as you debate this and as you look and read the testimony, I asked you to think about the faces of the families. And I appreciate your time. I know I've delayed your meeting, but I think you were looking for some examples. And I thank you for entertaining my testimony.
Thank you. Do you have a copy of the written testimony?
I do.
from the clerk?
I do.
And we will get, it's in the packet here.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we already all have it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It's gonna be very quick, Representative Lau.
My question is something you just brought up, but isn't a child allowed to go to a school where they're domiciled in? It doesn't make any difference where their parents are?
Not without legal guardianship.
If in New Hampshire you can, I believe.
Another school.
We can
If they're
discuss that.
living with their uncle or their aunt, as long as they're domiciled.
So that may be something for you to discuss.
What, Mary's gonna kill me.
I have one
Representative
question.
Lau, one question.
Isn't the enaction of the Common Core standard designed to address some of the issues that you mentioned here, that we have a common core of knowledge and skills, competencies throughout this country, so, and in the DOD, independent schools, et cetera? Shouldn't that go a long ways in terms of helping a student that moves so often?
The Common Core is a general group of standards in English language arts and mathematics only. So if you think particularly of history, of the wide variety of course requirements, that is only English language arts and mathematics in the Common Core. English language arts and mathematics. There's a wide variety of other subjects, and the Common Core doesn't say you are going to offer advanced placement courses, for example, or, you know, this child is going to be looked at through this lens or that lens. People have a lot of flexibility in implementing the Common Core. It will help, but it alone is not the answer. I will be going to Washington in April, where we will be talking about the impact of a Common Core curriculum, but what else our students need. And I thank you. I
Thank you
really
very much.
appreciate you
I'm going
entertaining
to
them.
recess until 14:88. Thank you very much. We will, like I said, the council chair will take.
Yeah, I think there's some,